The SABC News mobile app is your one-stop digital portal to all the news you need. Stay connected with the latest in breaking news. Watch the SABC News channel along with clips and live streams of all the big news events. And listen to all the SABC News radio stations live, including podcasts and much more. Simply download the SABC News app to your Android or iOS device from either the Play Store or the App Store. SABC News, independent, impartial.
SABC News is producing more than 150 election-related programs ahead of the May 8th election. If you think our content is not in line with our editorial policy, direct your complaints in writing to complaints@sabc.co.za. Complaints on election-related broadcast content should also be lodged with ICASA's Complaints and Compliance Committee by sending an email to bmashihu@icasa.org.za or call 012 568 3233.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us here on The Globe. Now, new polling data is predicting a massive fall in support for the ANC in this election. The Institute for Race Relations says the governing party will win only 53% of the votes nationally. That, of course, is based on a 70% voter turnout. The Institute is also predicting hung parliaments in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, respectively. The poll shows the DA retaining the Western Cape, while the EFF may win more support across the country. But to talk to us more about the survey, we joined now in studio by Gabriel Crouse. He is an associate at the South African Institute of Race Relations. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming through.
Good evening, Police. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much indeed. Now, just before we get into the study itself or the survey, really, I know that a number of surveys have been conducted from September last year into December and earlier this year. So, what could be drawn from the overall survey? Are there any similarities, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're generally in line with the sort of other surveys that are available. We do have the ANC looking a bit lower than some of the rest, but if you look at sort of the Economist cited 8 polls that had been averaged around mid-April in the year, and they had the ANC at about 55. So we're looking at the ANC at about 53. It's not outside of the norm.
Yeah. And of course, talking about the ANC, as you say, you're looking at what, 53 to 55%?
Yeah.
It depends on a number of things. Talk to us about those factors, of course, as I said on my introduction, including the voter turnout.
Right. So something to note is that we started our polling in September last year. We had the ANC very low at 52 around that time. The country had just been declared in a technical recession. Ramaphosa was starting to rub off. Then in December, we had the ANC climbing up to 59%. The recession was over, Christmas cheer was around, things were starting to look good. International investors had come to the party. Then load shedding struck. In February, we see them come down to 55. Then mid-April, we saw them down to 51%. But what they managed to do, and what we expected them to do, was engage the huge campaign machine they have. Lots of money, lots of boots on the ground, name brand politicians going out and getting the message out, and they started squeezing out the smaller parties and climbing up to 53, 55 in the final moments.
Yeah, so it's of course a combination of a number of things, as you say, your socio-economic factors coming into play as well.
Yeah, all of those different factors, the load shedding, the economy, how people are feeling. I think another thing to take acknowledgement of is that 1 million fewer people registered to vote in the last 5 years than if you compare it to the 5 years before that. So overall, there is certainly going to be fewer South Africans kind of showing up to the ballot box as a portion of the overall country. But in terms of voter turnout, we're not really sure what to look at there. Last election was 73%. The election before that was 75% of registered voters. Because there are fewer registered voters this time, that proportion of turnout might be a little bit higher, but we're looking at about 71%. And I think the ANC, if it's going to do well, it's going to be because it manages to bring more people to the ballot box than happened previously.
But what about the other two political parties, your DA and the EFF as well?
Yeah, so the DA we saw, for example, in big trouble in April in the Western Cape. It looked like it might actually lose its majority. And similar to the ANC, we've seen it sort of put out a squeeze message, say don't vote for the smaller parties, and it seems like it's crushed to a certain extent the ACDP and the Vryheidsfront Plus, who'd looked like they'd more than doubled their support but then shrunk again. The EFF is the most impressive in a way. I think they've had I think they win the points for the most attractive posters. A lot of people say to me, Julius Malema looks like what I'd like my son-in-law to look like. He looks very clear-eyed and clear-sighted. And I think their messaging, at least, has been really good, and so they'll more than double their vote, whatever the merits of their promises. And I think that, so the big question mark will be, how do the coalition politics play out in Gauteng? Where
all the parties, all the political parties are in a way sort of eyeing for Gauteng, of course, the DA saying they will win it, the ANC pulling all stops to, try to lure voters and make sure that they retain Gauteng. So it's quite a race there.
Yeah, I think it's really telling that the ANC and the EFF had their sort of major last rallies both in Johannesburg. I was lucky enough to attend both, and they were sort of quite splendid events. I think that it's the province, it's the economic powerhouse of the country, and also the fundamentals are sort of just so against the ANC's historic advantage there that they feel they need to play ball and get an outright win, because all three major parties have said that they don't really want to go into coalition with anyone else. Of course, on the other hand, you've got Ace Magashule sort of saying, please come back to the EFF, and Ramaphosa also said we'd love to have Julius Malema back last year. So that might be a coalition potential. ANC-DA coalition potential is possible. If you look at the DA's sort of track record in Tshwane and Johannesburg, it's looking pretty good. They might want to govern together. And of course, the opposition might get together, the EFF and the DA, saying, look, we're tired of the ANC. They've had their go. They haven't done so well, and we want to try and do better ourselves.
Yeah, so it will be interesting to see how that one plays out. Now, going back to the Democratic Alliance, as you say that it wasn't really performing well at the beginning of the year, according to your survey. But from what your polls suggest is that they may still retain the Western Cape province, which is quite surprising. I mean, if one takes a look at a number of incidents that have taken place within the DA, the Patricia de Lille saga, one would have actually thought that the support base would go down.
Right. So, and I think in a lot of ways, the story in the Western Cape is about a failure of the ANC to take advantage of precisely those moments of infighting. The national story is the DA failed to take advantage of the ANC's failures, and the provincial story is that the DA was shooting itself in the foot left, right and centre, but the ANC managed not to take advantage of that. And a lot of that does, at least in our polling, seem to come down to two things. One is sort of a track record of governance excellence, and another is the ANC's support base amongst coloured voters in the Western Cape. It seemed like it had a hardcore of very passionate supporters there that in the last 6 months, or at least since the last election cycle, seems to have drifted away and felt like their voices are not being represented properly.
But the DA as well also losing some white voters as well.
Right, so definitely losing some white voters, and it looks like some of those are going to the Vryheidsfront Plus. But like I said, in the last 2 weeks, we have these daily tracking polls, and you just see the Vryheidsfront Plus going down and the DA going back up.
So with the coloured voters that the ANC has lost, where are they going? Are they going to the Good Party, maybe?
No, the Good Party is really not doing well. I think Patricia de Lille probably overestimated her ability to sort of garner a lot of support there. It looks like a lot of those voters have switched over to the DA, and that some of them are going to stay at home, are expressing a sort of undecided sentiment.
Now, could the challenges, as I said, that we've seen, of course, playing out in the Democratic Alliance, could that be the reasons why some white voters left the DA?
Yeah, I mean, I think the DA, there were reports coming out of the DA having a discussion about BEE a month and a half ago, and Musi Maimane saying, shut up, I don't want to talk about this. And this was just those sort of leaks from the internal party meetings, I think, distressed certainly some white voters and certainly some voters from across the board. I think that the sort of land expropriation without compensation question is something that the DA has made a hard policy position of going against, but they haven't really sort of campaigned on it in the same way that COPE has, or some of the other smaller parties. And I think that there are certainly some minority voters who feel alienated by that.
All right, talking about COPE, did you perhaps get anything from COPE in your survey? This is one political parties that had 37 seats in Parliament back in 2014, and now they're sitting at, what, three seats?
Yeah, so I mean, they were a big flash in the pan in a way. The sort of defection from the ANC, unhappy about Zuma taking charge of the party, looking to try and establish a legitimate opposition, and they're not really managing to pull that off. The problem with polling a party like COPE is that they are so small that they fall within our margin of error. Now, I think that if this election campaign had gone differently, if the DA had campaigned hard for opposing an amendment to the Constitution, and likewise the ANC had campaigned hard for amending the Constitution. Yeah. Both parties kind of stayed away from the issue. If that had been how it played out, then I think COPE would have done much better, because MP Lekota has been the sort of most strident, non-racialist and protector of the Constitution. He sort of holds it like a Bible in his hands that you're not going to take away from him. And I think that people would have been attracted to that in that kind of extreme political debate. But the political debate in the build-up to this election has not been about the Constitution. I think in part because most South Africans, our polling indicates that most South Africans don't think land reform is a particularly high priority. They see they see education, jobs, crime, and so forth as being much higher priorities, and I think politicians have tried to speak to that.
Yeah, so Gabriel, here we are sitting here talking about what is likely to happen, what may and what may not happen. But of course we know that surveys, obviously, they not predictions, as one could put it. How accurate is your data, though?
Yeah, just to speak to something that I heard the Deputy CEO of the IEC say earlier about the 2016 Trump election and saying that they got it totally wrong. Nate Silver is the pollster that I look to in America, and he said that Trump had a 1 in 3 chance of winning it. And he won in a very 1 in 3 kind of way. Hey, it was a very tight victory. Yeah. Likewise, Brexit, the polls generally had the Leave kind of winning, but they said it's by 1 or 2%. It's within the margin of error, and the Leave vote won by 1 or 2%. So I think generally polls are sort of grounded in very hardcore statistics.
But we can't just shy away from them.
But you can't shy away from them. I think it's important to look at the big surprise. If there's going to be a big surprise, it's going to be higher voter turnout than expected. And one reason to think that that might be on the cards is that in terms of sort of special voting where the IEC goes to the public, sort of where they have difficulty in transporting themselves. In 2014, it was 350,000, if I've got this report correct. This year, it's already 700,000. So it seems like more of an effort's being made to get out there. That might skew things in terms of what we historically expected. And then, since we are talking about voter fraud, I must just mention that the IEC's own website indicates that 109% of people over the age of 80 are registered to vote. Now, how can you have more people registered to vote than there are? It's because they're not updating their voter register as people are passing away. So there are what the Russians would call dead souls on the voter registration, and that's kind of an opportunity for someone to get in there and vote as if they're a dead person, to double their vote or triple their vote. So I'm not saying that's happening, but it's a window that's been left open. I wish it had been shut earlier, and we're going to have to pay it careful attention. But everything so far, we've had a lot of free and credible elections. I hope there's another one.
We could talk the whole night. We have to leave it at this. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you.
All right, many thanks there to my guest, Gabriel Crouse from the South African Institute for Race Relations, of course, talking to us about this survey. It's a poll, which is not a prediction. Anything can happen come Wednesday. We're taking